This is the S2G podcast, where we share conversations that help us understand how to scale the food, agriculture, oceans, and energy transitions. I'm your host, Tanya Bekritzes. In this episode, we talk maritime decarbonization with Kate Danaher, Oceans Managing Director at S2G, and a few of our panelists from the S2G Summit. As a reminder, this content is for informational purposes only. It should not be taken as legal, business, tax, or investment advice, or be used to evaluate any investment or security, and is not directed at any investor or potential investor in any investment vehicle sponsored by S2G. Investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. Specific companies mentioned in this podcast are for educational purposes and should not be construed as an endorsement of any kind. Please note that S2G may maintain investments in some of the companies discussed on this podcast. For more important information, please see s2gventures.com/disclosures. We'll be experimenting with a new format for our next few episodes. As part of our recent summit, we had attendees split into different tracks: food and agriculture, oceans, and energy. These tracks consisted of panels moderated by our sector managing directors that dove into some of their focus areas. We were lucky to gather some really incredible and diverse experts, and in this episode, we'll share some of the highlights with you. I also interviewed the managing directors who led each panel afterward to get their thoughts on the topics discussed. We wove some of those reflections into the episodes as well. Since June is National Ocean Month, we wanted to start by sharing the panel Kate Danaher led about maritime decarbonization. It's a complex but incredibly dynamic and important topic, and the conversation explored market levers, business model innovation, short and long-term tech advancements, and much more that will all help reduce emissions in the maritime sector. So with no further ado, let's get things started with an intro to the S2G Summit and the panel from Kate. Hi, Kate. Thanks so much for joining us. Glad to have you here recapping our annual summit. To kick things off, would love to just hear, how did Summit go for you this year? Was there anything different about it from previous years or anything that surprised you?
Yeah, well, first of all, so it wasn't a surprise, but we had 450 people in attendance, which is just a lot bigger than we've ever gone before. So it was really exciting to see so much of our ecosystem activated. But the really exciting thing for me at this summit is that S2G started 10 years ago. We celebrated our 10-year anniversary this year. And for the first many years, it was really a sustainable food and ag fund. And over the past 4 years, we've developed other strategies around oceans, which Larson and I lead, the clean energy transition, as well as special opportunities like structured financing that doesn't look just like venture. And this was the first time that we really wove those narratives together publicly with our community to talk about how these sectors are big opportunities for transitioning to a cleaner environment, a cleaner planet, and combating climate change. We've been doing the oceans work now for almost 4 years, but it was really fun to see it all come together center stage with our community at Summit.
Yeah, that's great. And we also had separate tracks for each of our sectors. You and Larson led the oceans track, which was very exciting. And I think we're anxious to dig into a lot of the content that was covered there. So it would be great if you could just summarize some of the content and specifically themes you're observing in the blue economy and how the paradigm is changing to meet any challenges.
So we really think about 4 themes in our oceans work that are unlocking a lot of opportunities to transition some key sectors like the maritime industry, which is one of the topics we spoke about. The first is decarbonization. We are living in a time where industry and governments are really pushing the decarbonization of industries. And so that's a very interesting topic for us because the ocean itself is the largest carbon sink on the planet. And there are technologies that are emerging to address that, but also some of the biggest industries that operate globally operate on the ocean. And they're some of the largest greenhouse gas contributors. And so they have a lot of work to do in decarbonizing themselves. It felt like an important conversation to really bring forward, especially because the maritime sector moves 90% of goods around the globe, but it's not something that we experience in our day-to-day lives. So people don't think about it very often. So bringing that center stage. And one of the other themes that we spend a lot of time thinking about in our investment thesis is around the role of, well, we call ocean intelligence, but the emergence of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other technologies that are helping to create new ways of doing business and creating new insights into doing business and driving efficiencies. And so we spent our second panel talking about ocean intelligence and what that means for investing in the blue economy.
We'll cover the Ocean Intelligence panel with Larson in the next episode, so look out for that. Kate kicked off this first panel by emphasizing the importance of the sector's role in the global decarbonization effort.
The maritime industry is responsible for about 3% of greenhouse gases. So the industry has a very big role to play in global decarbonization, and there are a lot of regulatory tailwinds that are exciting there, but I think that many of us know that innovation and markets tend to move faster than regulation. And so we've got some really interesting folks on the stage that represent ship owners and data collectors to ports to new innovative business models to try and develop that market. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the challenges to thinking about decarbonizing the shipping industry and some of the short kind of and long-term plays that people are betting on to get us there. I'd love each of you to introduce yourselves, and if you can also situate yourself in the context of the value chain, that would be helpful. David, you want to start?
So my name is David Millar, and I'm Government Accounts Director with Fugro, based in the Washington, D.C. area. Fugro is a geodata specialist, so we acquire, analyze, and provide advice on geodata, significantly ocean intelligence data, with multiple platforms using multiple sensors. And one of those platforms is a fleet of ships. So we're not a shipping company, but ships are a means to an end for us. So we own approximately 30 ocean-going research vessels and charter 20 at any given time. We are a multinational corporation headquartered in Europe. So some of my comments that I'll share in this session are actually from that perspective of a European publicly traded company. But we operate globally in 60 countries, and that's our perspective that we'll be bringing to the discussion here today, is really the transition that we have embarked on towards decarbonization of our fleet and reduction of our impact on ocean and climate through our activities.
Great, thanks very much. My name is Jason Giffen. I'm coming here from the Port of San Diego. Very appropriate that we're talking about maritime decarbonization. Our portfolio, when it comes to sustainability in the space in San Diego and the Port of San Diego, is really unique. We manage San Diego Bay, a little over 11,000 acres. Predominantly, most of that is submerged lands. We manage that along with the Navy. We're going to focus mostly on the industrial working waterfront side of things. But from a land acreage standpoint, the largest area of our portfolio is not human-made, but it's natural. The submerged lands, National Wildlife Refuge in South San Diego Bay. And I bring that up because as you look at the global network of ports across the world, we like to say in the port industry, if you've seen one port, you've seen one port. So if you want to focus on decarbonization, you have to follow the links in shipping and each port's role, as well as not just their relationship to ocean-going vessels, but you also have to look at surface transportation on land. And at the Port of San Diego, we wear many hats. We're a landlord, we're an operator, we're a regulator, and an environmental steward. And so we often look at things through a triple bottom line lens. And that's some of the things that I'll share as a part of this panel.
Great. My name is Ingrid Irigoyen. I'm the Senior Director for Ocean and Climate at the Aspen Institute, which is a not-for-profit headquartered in Washington, D.C. We also have a lovely campus in Aspen, Colorado, which you're welcome to come visit. I'm also the chief executive of a new organization called the Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance, which is a buyers group of cargo owners. And I'm going to tell you what a cargo owner is first and where it fits into the supply chain. So when you get a box or a product from a store, it has typically come from a distribution center that belongs to a major multinational. And those goods have come through a port, typically then trucked or by rail brought to a distribution center. And a shipping company has come to that port, has delivered those goods. That shipping company may or may not actually own that vessel. And so in some cases, some of the major carriers actually own about half their fleet. But many of the vessels, and I don't know the exact percentage of the cargo fleet, is actually owned by, in some cases, independent families. So you have owners, you have operators, and then you have cargo owners, and that's who I work with. These are the brands. And some of those are very public-facing brands. They move their goods via a variety of different vessel types. And so during my comments, I'll refer to different segments of shipping. We have started working in the container segment because those tend to be more public-facing companies. But you also have dry bulk shipping. You have roll-on, roll-off for car carriers, tankers, a wide variety of vessels, big vessels, little vessels. They run on several different types of fuel now, and they're about to run on several different more types of fuel into the future. And so that whole value chain is pretty often opaque. It is often low margin. And so the cost of what is going to be a very expensive transition, also a big opportunity for people who are clever, often boils down to everyone pointing at the cargo owners and saying, are you willing to pay more to transport your goods across the ocean? And so there are many reasons that this industry is challenged to decarbonize, but one of them is that. And that is the specific challenge that we seek to address.
Nice. I'd love actually all of you to comment, but maybe David, you can start. Regulation. There have been a lot of regulations in the shipping industry specifically that have come online that have really encouraged companies to really start thinking about the decarbonization efforts. But it's one step. The IMO standards are one step, and I think there's still a long way to go before they're really enforceable. There's much more regulation that needs to come.
The IMO is the International Maritime Organization. It's a United Nations agency that sets global standards for the safety, security, and environmental performance of international shipping.
But we've seen a lot of the ship owners, the buyers of the product, ports, voluntarily setting these really aggressive mandates for themselves around their contribution to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. And so there's this interesting thing at play between regulatory markets. I think everyone's anticipating that those are going to come online, but that could take a while. There's the voluntary actions that companies are taking. And then, of course, there's market pull. And those three factors being ways in which we can really encourage the industry to shift. And so I'm curious from each of you if you can speak to what is pulling you towards the decarbonization model. Is it markets? Is it regulation? Is it voluntary for some reason? And how do you see that influencing your businesses moving forward?
I'll start then. So I think from our perspective, as a publicly traded company, we do see some pressure in terms of the reporting requirements that are expected and increasing transparency that Kimberly mentioned earlier, right? So that's one of the drivers. And I think we are a purpose-driven company. Our purpose is to help create a safe and livable world. And for a company that's doing so and operating on the ocean, in the ocean, and on the floor of the ocean, we have an obligation to do so very responsibly and to minimize impacts. So you mentioned the increasing regulatory frameworks in shipping, and that is true, but they are not particularly ambitious, right? The IMO regulations are still net zero by 2050. Mm-hmm. That's a long time away. Our company has made a commitment to have net zero carbon emissions by 2035, which is very ambitious, I would say, for a company that operates so many vessels. That is voluntary, right? And that's going to be done in two main ways. It's going to be done through a change of the profile of the fleet in terms of moving to on crewed and robotic platforms. We are very much moving in that direction, and to the extent possible, the work that we do will be done by these types of platforms and vessels versus traditional large ocean-going ships. But some of the work, particularly in deep water, will, at least not in the near term, be able to be accomplished by these smaller uncrewed surface vehicles. The other aspect is the larger ocean-going ships, conventionally crewed, that we may have to maintain to be able to get systems to the seafloor in full ocean depth. And those will require larger platforms. And in that sense, we are switching to alternative clean fuels. And we've just completed the retrofit of our first vessel that will be operating with green methanol later this year. And that will be the first of several vessels that will be converted. So I think for us, it's largely voluntary, but it's, again, I think a corporate social responsibility piece here for our business and for our stakeholders that we are taking these actions.
You don't really have consumers per se. So what's the end user that you have a responsibility towards that's compelling you to be 15 years ahead of the regulation?
Financially, it doesn't make sense for us to do this yet. These are not delivering less expensive solutions to our clients. That's different, I should say, with the kind of fuel conversion. That's a very different story with the uncrewed surface vehicles. So it's really kind of shareholder pressure, right? I think that's quite significant, and it is a different landscape in Europe. We have very substantial reporting obligations now that are far beyond financial disclosures. So non-financial disclosures now are part of our business, and these are highly scrutinized. And we have just completed a process of getting approved by the Science Based Targets Initiative to verify our short-term and long-term decarbonization plans. So I think this, again, is part of the transparency that is part of that landscape of the shareholder environment in Europe.
Yeah, it's becoming like business as usual.
This is part of the business going forward, absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. Jason or Ingrid?
I might just add, with getting back to the focus of the question in terms of markets of opportunity versus regulation, from the California experience, shifting down from the international discussion on IMO, we're seeing, at least in California, especially at the Port of San Diego, we're a public corporation and a regional government entity created by the state of California, but we don't collect taxes. So everything that we do to advance our mission of maritime commerce, recreation, fisheries, and environmental stewardship is done through public and public-private partnerships. And what we're seeing is an acceleration of certain types of regulations, but to remain competitive and have that competitive advantage, as well as continuing to have access to grant funding, which then gets essentially cut off once it's become a regulation. We've got this tension between market opportunities and regulations, and it's in this accelerating mode. So what we're trying to do is we look to electrify every link in the supply chain, from shore power for ocean-going vessels to hovercraft. We'll have the E-Wolf soon operating in San Diego Bay, which is the first all-electric tugboat, as well as electric cargo handling equipment, all the way to trucks and trains. How do we position ourselves to stay ahead so we can make that initial infrastructure investment and equipment investment and still maintain that competitive advantage at the front end? Because if we wait, there just won't be as many opportunities and other partners to co-invest with us. We also want to make sure that we're having a lighter footprint on our local environment. Ports in most areas, there are some rural ports around the world, but most of them are in very urbanized areas. And our constituency, compared to shareholders, is the surrounding community. And for us anyway, it's the state of California. And there's an enormous focus on equity, environmental justice. And so some of the themes that we've been pushing towards our maritime decarbonization effort is health equity for all. So getting off that diesel diet and focusing on whether it's right now battery electric power or some type of alternative fuel. That's where we're going.
Yeah, speaking from the point of view of the companies that I work with, they range in size. Some of them are very large, they're forward-leaning, they're future-oriented, they're the kind of companies that like to do longer-term planning, and some of them are really small, and for a variety of reasons, they're motivated to decarbonize this sector. For the most part, what we see is a lot of them have made net zero commitments that when they made them a few years ago, they were very ambitious, and they'll be quick to confess that they did not know how they were going to achieve them. They felt the pressure to set those commitments, and when they look at their Scope 3 emissions, their supply chain emissions, they're absolutely stumped for many of those aspects of their supply chain. Maritime, for a very long time, was a hopeless case. And so the best that they could do in terms of crossing the ocean was to switch from air to ocean. And that was a significant immediate emissions reduction and also a cost savings if you can handle the longer transit time. So maybe not appropriate for organic raspberries, but for many goods. They now see that there is hope. There is the possibility of new fuels and technologies that could reach economic viability as they come to scale. And they want to be at the forefront of that because ocean transport is absolutely essential to their business. And they do not want to be in the expected supply crunch in the coming years as regulation slowly but surely becomes implemented. First mover action is tremendously important. And our companies understand that if they help lead this transition in an industry that is absolutely essential to their businesses, in the long run, they will have access to what will be hopefully not, but probably will be a very limited supply of the green fuels and technologies that are going to be needed for the transition. And they also understand, in the case of the Buyers Alliance that I run, that if they work together, they'll be able to get to economies of scale faster. Cargo owners don't show up at the IMO. We are starting to bring them to the IMO with decarbonization talking points. And so even their influence over this industry has been very limited so far. We're providing channels and opportunities for them to start to influence it because they understand that if this transition isn't handled well, it has serious cost and supply chain reliability impacts potentially on them in the future. So they're motivated by all that, including also the climate risk disclosure requirements. Certainly in Europe, the SEC unfortunately didn't help us out. I had many companies who tend not to be leaders say to me, oh, if that SEC Scope 3 disclosure rule comes into effect, I'll be knocking on your door and we'll join your initiative. That's the first thing we'll do. And sadly, now I have to come up with other reasons for them to join. But I would say that those are some of the motivators.
On Maritime Decarb, you had a great set of panelists up on stage, and they really came from different aspects of the maritime industry and talked about the role that they can play in global decarbonization efforts. What are your thoughts on that? What are the effective levers for encouraging decarbonization in this industry?
It's a great question. There's so many. You think about what were the levers that really pushed industries to adopt solar, wind energy and get off of the fossil fuel diet. And I think some similar levers are available in the maritime sector. The number one thing that I believe is an unlock for maritime decarbonization is markets, that I'll talk about in a second, because the other two play a really important role, but can take a longer time to evolve. So I think we need regulation to be put into place and enforced. That is really what is going to push a lot of the industry players to make the changes they need to make. But regulation takes a long time. The maritime sector is global by nature, so no one country has the power to move the entire industry. Progress is being made, but we still are far from having regulation that is clearly enforceable. Corporate social responsibility, I think, is actually something we hear about a lot in the United States, but it plays a really big role in the EU. A lot of companies are required to report on their emissions and their emission targets and what they're doing to decarbonize. And we heard it from David at Fugro as an example that one of the main motivators for them to voluntarily be decarbonizing themselves ahead of regulation is because they have to report every year. And there are standards that they're held to by the European Union and consumers behind that. They have to report what they're doing to make progress. And that is a very strong motivator. And then the last one, of course, is what we believe really strongly in, is just market development. Markets, if you think about it, they transcend borders, laws, politics, and markets can move fast. Once they pick up steam and the right incentives are in place, they can move really quickly. So we do need social pressures, we need regulation, but we can make a lot of progress on developing market drivers with those before those other two pieces are in place.
So regulations, social, corporate responsibility, and market demand will all play a role in encouraging maritime decarbonization. But in addition to the drivers, companies will also need the right tools to capitalize on decarbonization opportunities.
When we think about some of these big, clunky transitions that need to take place, there's three major innovation ingredients. There's technological innovation, there's business model innovation, and then there's financial innovation, really creating the fit-for-purpose capital that is unique to financing these transitions. And I think it is worth spending a few minutes on Zemba because you are a business model innovation that is helping to build the market for the transition to alternative fuels, which is going to be probably a little dicey, trying to figure out which fuel is going to win and how we de-risk it, and then financing the capital expenditures. But there needs to be a market on the other end for people to feel like they can invest into. And could you spend a few minutes just explaining the business model innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you who aren't familiar with container freight and the way that this normally plays out, most cargo owners enter into freight contracting relationships that are a year at the most. They tend to use a number of suppliers. And what we need in this space is much longer term commitments to essentially offtake the environmental attributes associated with zero emission shipping. Zero emission shipping, the fuel is much more expensive than the cheap sludge at the bottom of the oil that most ships currently run on. And so when you look at the total cost of ownership for vessels, the CapEx that goes into transitioning to zero emissions is manageable. I'm not a ship owner, so you can tell me if it's not manageable, but we're seeing a lot of new vessel orders that are dual fuel. The biggest cost hit for them is the OpEx, and it's mostly fuel. So they need a market to offtake those emissions reductions. Otherwise, they're going to be stuck holding the bag in a very competitive, low margin market of container freight, where if they're paying 2, 3, 4 times more for fuel than their competitors, they're not going to be able to survive. So they need to pass some of those costs on to their customers. Those customers are my companies. And so we're creating a variety of systems and trying to influence the enabling conditions so that our customers are able to come together, aggregate demand, run competitive tenders for the environmental attributes of zero emission shipping, and make that not only a forward procurement, but also a longer term commitment. With the theory being that if they make a longer term commitment to pay a premium, shipping companies can turn around and make longer term offtake agreements with e-fuel producers. And so our intention is to kickstart this market, to create a committed group of off-takers of those environmental attributes. We're engaged in some of the innovation around carbon accounting so that these environmental attribute certificates can be claimed by the companies that paid the premium. Part of our challenge is that we don't really know what these fuels are going to cost. There's a lot of modeling, but no one's actually gone to market, particularly for the newest fuels, the e-fuels. And so we just completed our first commercial tender. We have a winner, Hapag-Lloyd shipping line, that is going to be deploying a waste-based biomethane product that our companies have come together to offtake. And we've made that a 2-year commitment only because of the scalability concerns with biogenic feedstocks. And what we really want to see is e-fuels. Our hope is that when we run our next tender, which we'll do later this year, to really have a focus on e-fuels, which will be much more expensive, but make a longer term commitment with a bigger group of companies so that we can get those solutions to scale. It's all antitrust compliant, by the way.
Kate explained why these types of business model innovations are so important.
So one of the business model innovations that is going to enable the entire value chain to really take decarbonization seriously and make the investments that it needs to make to do that is to create the market to pull that demand forward. And so what Ingrid has done in terms of like business model innovations is she's gotten a bunch of very large brands together that move quite a lot of freight all over the globe via ocean transport to come together essentially in a buying alliance to say who can work with us that is willing to commit to running on e-fuels, to reducing their emissions. We will give you our business. And that is creating that market is what is the signal and the commitment that then the industry needs to say, okay, let's go. We've got this in hand. We've got the sales in hand. Let's go rebuild our infrastructure. This particular business model innovation is all about creating the market that allows the rest of the supply chain to transition confidently.
Ingrid mentioned that the technology she is really looking out for are e-fuels, but those will take some time to come online and scale up. We will need solutions sooner than that.
E-fuel is the holy grail. It's what everybody's anticipating. It will move the needle the most by a lot, but there's a lot of innovation that has to happen. There's a lot of de-risking that needs to happen. There's market making that needs to happen, and then a lot of infrastructure that needs to transition. And between now and whenever that happens, there's a lot of shorter term innovations that are happening right now that a lot of companies are testing out and trying out. I'm wondering if you two can speak to, from a ship owner perspective as well as a port perspective, what are the accessible technologies today that you're starting to implement that you're excited about that are really working?
Yeah, from our standpoint, it's an evolving space, right? There are a lot of fuel choices, actually, but they very much are specific and align with the nature of your operation, right? So even though there may be several different alternatives, when you actually look at the profile of your operation, then you can actually pretty quickly narrow that down. And for us, because of the nature of our operation, we're not necessarily going point to point on a route back and forth. We are moving around the world to where we collect our data. And our vessels are fixed size. They are relatively small in the commercial shipping space. They're 55 to 75 or 80 meters long. So then the safety aspects around ammonia and separating crew from the fuel source isn't really an alternative, and the size of the hydrogen fuel storage is not really an option. So we were pushed into a place of green methanol, and doesn't mean that things won't change in the future and that we may deviate, but at the moment we said we have to do something. We're going to start with what makes sense today, and we are working on a path that will take us towards this converting to green methanol. And we're doing so not in isolation. We're part of a consortium in the Netherlands that is trying to create this movement and build up the supply chain that is supported to be able to take green methanol in shipping forward. It will really take a community effort to get these actions met.
Yeah. And Jason, my understanding is the fuel infrastructure piece is on your radar, but it's not necessarily part of the plan right now because it's really complex.
When you look at the Port of San Diego, we tend to think of ourselves as a port of opportunity, and we're setting extremely ambitious goals. Like I mentioned before, California's regulations are ever increasingly strict, and we're trying to stay just ahead of it with what we're setting up as our opportunity. We have goals like 100% cargo handling equipment by 2030, 100% electric trucks by 2030, which is 5, if not 15 years ahead of the rest of the state. So when we start thinking about that, we're looking at how we can have the most immediate impact. And so for us right now, it's focusing on electrification of cargo handling equipment, shore power for all the ships that plug in. And that's also very complex. We've talked a little bit about container ships, but you look at the profile of vessels, and we have them all that come to San Diego. We've got roll-on, roll-off. We've got refrigerated cargo, bulk, all of which have different requirements for when they need to have shore power. And essentially, instead of running a diesel generator while they're at berth, they can plug into the grid. But what we're most excited about is to be a port that has the first electrification of an entire link. So I mentioned we're deploying the first electric tug. So if we have an electric tug, shore power, first all ultra heavy lift electric cranes in North America we used to only be able to lift 100 metric tons. We've quadrupled that capacity. So between them operating electric reach stackers and forklifts that then load on to an electric truck, and we're right now in an exclusive negotiating agreement with a group called Skychargers that's going to build an electric truck stop. It's going to be focused. It's going to be battery electric. So when we start looking at the opportunity there, short haul trucking. So San Diego is it's in a mega region on the border with Mexico. So we've got a lot of opportunities for short haul, 150 to 200 miles that we're focusing on in the near term, and we hope we can be a catalyst for that change.
Could I actually ask you a question? So regarding fuel, the focus of our work is really at this point on deep sea transport. A lot of the decarbonization of port operations is also tremendously important to our companies. But when it comes to that deep sea transport, what we're really going to need is the ability for those vessels to bunker the new fuels, right? And it also means that ports are going to have to get the local communities comfortable with bunkering new fuel types. And we see a lot of resistance. And those same communities really want these ports to decarbonize and clean up their local air pollution. So how are you forward planning for that in a world where there's still so much debate about which fuels and on which geographies, and recognizing that the US, one of the things we do very well is make fuel. And so there's a tremendous economic opportunity in this country to be fuel producers and actually become bunkering hubs and not just ceding that power to some of the other ports around the world. So how do you view that in the long term? I'm curious.
I think it's going to take a lot of hard work. We do a ton of community engagement to talk about the transition and why switching from traditional fossil fuels to, I'll just say, an E or a green fuel is going to take a lot of work. Specifically in California, there's very strict regulations from the California Coastal Commission on how oil and gas are regulated. The question is still out in the coastal zone. How will these new fuels be regulated, and how will they move forward with just getting coastal development permits, as an example? It's something that we're all going to have to be engaged in, the industries as well as the companies involved in logistics and ports and everyone. They're going to have to come together. I don't have a simple answer for you, but
Maritime is so fun. Don't you all want to work in maritime decarbonization?
yeah.
The challenges are infinite. It's exhilarating.
You're building a whole market.
Left.
Sorry.
I barged in as
No,
to
you
be
had
moderator
you had the last word, actually, because I think that we are right about at time. I guess all of that to say, it is an incredibly complex industry and situation, but I feel like they all are. And if we can tackle piece by piece. Eventually, it will all have to come together because I don't really see another way that we can go.
I was curious if after having some time to reflect, Kate had any key takeaways from the panel.
I think in the maritime sector in particular, what we continue to learn, and I talked about it a little bit on the panel, it is just such a complex sector. There are so many players, and within each part of the value chain, there are a lot of players, and the way that they depend on each other and where they have negotiating power or not is really complex. And one of my takeaways I continue to take away and noodle on is I don't think that we can really think about our investment thesis through making one investment in a single technology. It really is going to require us engaging with multiple stakeholders and understanding those multiple stakeholders and how we invest in those pain points that unlock things for multiple groups, not just one. And I think one of those opportunities is around like digitization of the value chain of maritime shipping. A lot of things are still done with paper. Somebody said 10 years ago, they were still sending a bucket down the side of the ship with the order written on paper. Today, they still send a bucket down the ship, but it's on an iPad. I don't know if that's actually accurate or not.
Yeah,
but
the sentiment,
that was the
right?
visual. Yeah. I think the digitization that creates the transparency and the optimization there is something that like is a pain point for many stakeholders in that. And so I think that opportunities like that are great for investors like S2G to really try and solve.
It's a really fascinating space. I think as someone just new to this subject, it was very eye-opening hearing all the different perspectives that were covered on the talk. One just other observation I'll throw in as an ending is your portfolio showed up in a big way from all around the globe, and it was so exciting to see. Is there anything you really hope they come away with from the event?
Oh, yeah. It was so encouraging. The ocean strategy is the most global of all three of our strategies, at least to date. We have about 17 companies in our portfolio, and over half of them are from outside of North America. And this was the first time we were able to bring them into our ecosystem and show them, I think, the power of connections and relationships and what we've built. And so, one, my greatest hope is that they got to spend time with each other, because I think being entrepreneurs can be a lonely business, and it's always great to find kind of solidarity amongst your peers. Two, I hope that they were able to meet some really interesting people in the room that can help them think differently or support their business. So I hope we find ways to create more value creation out of Summit for them.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for reconnecting, Kate, on this. We're excited to share the dialogue. So
thank you, Tanya.
Thank you for tuning in to the S2G podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, or share it with a friend. For more information or to connect with us, check out s2gventures.com.